Hey guys, I'm going to try to get through this very quickly. I'm going to do a brief summary of every chapter in the Meg so that you can do your slides if you're behind. So I'm going to go through it really quickly. So you might have to watch it more than once, but I'll put it on Google Classroom and we will go from there. Chapter 1, it's the intro to the Megalodon. Not a lot happens. All that we really see is that the Megalodon attacks and kills a T-Rex, which is a big deal because that shows how big and powerful it actually is. Then we have chapter 2, it's called The Professor. Here we just see Jonas for the first time. He's lecturing about the Megalodon. He's one of the few people that thinks that this thing could actually still be alive deep in the ocean, but a lot of other people disagree with that. So he is constantly being bombarded with questions from critics who don't agree with him. Chapter 3 is called Maggie, and we of course know that Maggie is his wife and that she is most likely cheating on him with Bud Harris. She works at as a journalist, so they are attending an awards banquet for a prize that she has won. And at that awards banquet, Jonas punches Bud Harris, and then Terry shows up and she is kind of asking for help. And that leads into the next chapter, which is chapter 4, called Eunice, which stands for Unmanned Nautical Information Submersible. And that's the device that the Tanaka Institute has put at the bottom of the ocean to track the earthquakes. And one of them is down there and it has been broken, and Terry is showing Jonas pictures of it. And Jonas is like, oh, that's kind of weird, and he's thinking that maybe, the Meg could be involved, but still a lot of other people don't believe him. So he's trying to decide whether or not he wants to go back down and help them recover that, because he's kind of had that accident before. So he's very hesitant to go back down to the Challenger Deep. But in chapter 5, we see that he does agree to help her. He travels back to the lagoon with Terry, and then when they're looking at the footage, he sees what he thinks is a megalodon tooth. So he is like, oh my gosh, this is gonna prove everything that I've worked for, but no one else is still they're kind of I don't know, dude, that's kind of a little far-fetched, but if that's what you think it is, then whatever. Chapter 6 is called Masso, who we know is Terry and DJ's dad, the Asian family that's in charge of the Tanaka Institute. So Masso kind of tells us his background story, his love for whales. But the big thing that happens probably in this chapter is that Jonas kind of goes into detail about the accident that he was responsible for, where the 2 scientists died, kind of explains, who Frank Keller was in that situation, what actually happened, what he thought he saw. And Masso's like, dude, I think you just saw some tube worms. I don't know, I haven't been down to the Challenger Deep, but based on what DJ has told us, that's probably what you saw. And I think that you should go with DJ. And so Jonas agrees to go on the dive with DJ. Chapter 7 is the Kiku, which is the research ship that they're launching the submersibles for. So not a lot happens in this chapter. DJ shows Jonas the Abyss glider, how to work the submersible, and then they just prepare for their dive in the trench. Chapter 8 is called Frank Keller, and we find out that Frank is the doctor that medically cleared Jonas for the dive where the accident occurred. And he is, this entire chapter, is insistent. He does not think that Jonas is ready to go on this dive again. And a lot of people on board of the Kiku are making fun of Jonas for believing in the Meg. They think he's crazy. And so they're kind of like, oh, maybe Frank Keller's right. Maybe he shouldn't be allowed to go. Chapter 9 is called The Descent, so this is actually when they begin to make their dive into the Challenger Deep. Jonas, his life vitals are kind of fluctuating, and Frank Keller's freaking out, I think we should pull him back up, he's not gonna make it, and Jonas keeps popping pills to help with his anxiety and claustrophobia, but he's doing okay for the most part. And they get to the bottom and he's like, oh my gosh, there's so much life down here, I had no idea. So he's like, maybe, something as big as the Meg could be living down here. Chapter 10 is called the Challenger Deep, so this is when they actually get to the bottom. And Jonas sees what he thought was a tooth, and it actually just ends up being a starfish leg. So people up top are making fun of him. He's like, maybe it was just a patch of tube worm. I'm clearly crazy. But then the male megalodon comes and swims by, and so Jonas is yelling at DJ to cut his lights and to stop moving, stop trying to unravel the cable that got twisted around his ship. and then basically they come up with this plan to blind the Meg, and then DJ's gonna shoot up really fast into the cold water, hoping that the Meg doesn't follow him. But in that moment, like, the Meg, freaks out from the blinded light, and a big wave comes, and Jonas hits his head and goes unconscious. So now Jonas is passed out. DJ's like trying to get his ship as fast as he can away from the Meg, and that's when we go into chapter 11 called The Female. So the male Megalodon, he chases DJ down and he eats him, like blood, guts, spatter everywhere. Like, DJ's dead, and then Jonas wakes up and sees this, and then all of a sudden, Jonas is like, oh gosh, like, DJ's dead, but then he has to quickly like think on his feet, because what comes? The female Meg. And so the female Meg comes and attacks the male, and then uses its warm bloodstream to escape the trench and go towards the surface. So Jonas is watching all this happen and can't really do anything because he can't really move because it'll attract the female, and he's just watching pretty much the Kiku like help the female Meg escape the trench, because they're towing DJ's submersible that's still attached to that cable, and the male's wrapped around in it, and so then the female's able to escape through the blood, and then Jonas eventually recovers enough, and the Meg is gone, and he's able to escape and go back up to shore. Then chapter 12 is called Aftermath. Basically, not a lot happens. Everyone's just asking questions. All the news reporters are there trying to figure out what's going on with the Meg, and no one is really taking Jonas seriously when he says, look, there's a female that has come to the surface. We got to find it, do something about it. Like, no one's really taking that like seriously. But 13, Jonas and Matt go out and find evidence. They go look at the whale carcass that they find, and actually almost get attacked by the Meg. And in the whale carcass, they pull out that tooth, and so they're using it as evidence. They take it back to use it as evidence, to show everyone that, look, like, there's a live female Megalodon that is now up at the surface, and we need to be worried about it. So they go into chapter 14 called Options, and so the Navy, the people at the Tanaka Institute, and Jonas, they all discuss what needs to be done about the Meg. Masseau decides that he wants to really capture it and keep it in his lagoon because it's like a feat of nature, and they want to study it, and he thinks that would bring honor to DJ's death. But the Navy is basically like, dude, like, that's cool if you want to try that, but if we get to the Meg first, we're killing that thing because we think it's a danger to people on beaches, to the whale population, so like, we're taking it out. So chapter 15, all the people aboard the Kiku, they come up with their strategy. They're basically going to drug the Meg, they're going to put a net around it, and then they're going to drag it in the lagoon. And Maggie and Jonas, like, she's still there because she's trying to get, all the story, the inside scoop for her journalism career. And they basically agree, like, look, this marriage is over, but, like, we can help each other be successful in, our news stories and stuff. Chapter 16, we have an attack from the Meg. Mac, Jonas, Terry, and Maggie are all in the helicopter trying to locate the Meg so they can shoot it with the tracking device. But the Meg hears the vibrations of the helicopter that they're in and jumps out of the water to attack the helicopter. And thankfully, nothing bad happens. Everyone makes it out alive. But, we can see that the Meg is very sensitive to all these sounds and vibrations around it. Chapter 17 is Hawaii. We see a group of people that we've never seen before at the surfing competition. And the reason why we see this is because, we're following the Meg at this point. So it's transitioned to follow the character of the Meg. And at the surfing competition, the surfers are deep enough. It's a specific area where the water's deep enough. It creates really big waves. And so the Meg is actually able to get close enough to attack people. And it eats at least one of the surfers. And then several of them make it back alive. Chapter 18 is called Battle at Sea. Basically, the Navy has equipped the Nautilus, a really old submarine, but that the people really like, and they are going to try to go after and kill the Meg and the Nautilus. But things go really wrong, and a lot of people die, including Frank Heller's brother, whose name was Dennis. So Dennis is dead. A lot of other people died. Their mission did not go well. Chapter 19 is called Lost and Found. Not much happens. They haven't seen the Meg in a while since really the attack on the Nautilus. But then this random dude finds a bunch of whales that have washed up on the beach, and so he calls Maggie, and Maggie is deciding that she wants to do her underwater story. So that's Canyon. That's a chapter that's all about Maggie. She's underwater in that tube that she's created, that's supposed to be big enough for the Meg not to put its jaws around. But she's down there, and the Meg, if it can't bite something, it's just gonna like ram into it and punch it with its head. So she gets all thrown off, and Jonas comes down to save her, but Maggie refuses to drop the camera, and the Meg comes up and eats her. So it's kind of stupid of her. She ends up dying because she, wanted this footage so bad, and didn't, prioritize saving her own life. She was trying to save the camera first. But at the end of the chapter, there's a small sliver of hope because Jonas is able to shoot the Meg with a tracking device. So hopefully that they can capture it going forward. Morning, really short chapter. Maggie dies, so everyone's pretty sad. Bud is really upset, but Danielson and Frank Heller come to him, since they've both also lost people due to the attacks on the Meg, and they're like, dude, come help us. We want to kill the Meg before the Tanakas can get to it and drag it into the lagoon. Jonas is also obviously very upset over Maggie dying, and Masseau visits him hoping that Jonas will help capture the Meg, but Jonas is very hesitant because there's just been so much death. Chapter 22 is Payback. We see a bunch of tourists go out on their boats watching the Meg, and the Meg actually attacked one of the tour boats in the daytime, which was a first, because now it had been blinded by, Mac. And so it's surfacing during the day, which is a, kind of a concern. But they were able to drug it, and right before it went to sleep, it spazzes out a lot and does some serious damage to the Kiku ship. So the Kiku is now taking on water, and in chapter 23 we see that it's actually really kind of sinking. Bud Harris and his little gang are trying to blow up the Meg underwater, but are ultimately unsuccessful. And the last thing that we see in this chapter is that the Meg is coming out of its comatose state. It's waking up from its drugs, which leads into chapter 24 called Chaos. The Meg is getting loose from its nets. It's fully awake now and is going to start attacking people. All those tourist boats that are there are at risk. The people on the Kiku are at risk. Everyone is at risk. So the Kiku decides to abandon ship because they're taking on so much water. And we see that Jonas is still somewhere in the water, in the Abyss glider, just watching this all happen. Chapter 25, Feeding Frenzy. The Kiku is sinking, so people get off of it. The Meg is woken up from the drugs. It's going crazy, attacking all the people on the boat. Several people are getting eaten. It's a bloodbath, it's horrible. Terry almost dies, but Jonas is able to distract the Meg. And ultimately, the last thing that we see in this chapter is that Jonas, in attempts to save everyone else, actually drives his submersible straight into the mouth of the Megalodon. So it's crazy. A bunch of people are dying, and so Jonas is like, look, I got to take one for the team. I'm taking my submersible. I'm going to try to do damage from the inside. I'm just going to drive. I think he's not really concerned about whether he dies because he, obviously wants to save the love of his life, Terry, and then everyone else, all these, just normal people on the ship. Chapter 26, last chapter, Hell, and it is hell. Let me just tell you, things go crazy. We found out Jonas is still alive in his submersible inside the stomach of the Megalodon. So he's trying to come up with a plan of how he can do the most damage on the inside, but also make it out alive. So he uses his fossilized Megalodon tooth, he cuts through some muscle of the Meg, and then he ignites the hydrogen fuel tank to shoot back out of the Meg's mouth. Well, because that was an ignition, there was fire, it was almost like a rocket, it burns all the whale oil that the Meg has consumed, and so it burns the inside of the Meg and kills it. So Jonas somehow makes it out alive, from this whole thing, and kills the Meg at the same time. But his submersible is taking on water. So the submersible is taking on water. He basically has to get out at a certain point and try to swim to the surface, but it's too far and he passes out. So he's starting to go down. He's not going to make it out alive. But then at the last second, we see Terry. She comes down, grabs his hand, and is able to drag him all the way back up to the boat and resuscitate him. And when they're on the boat actually catches what they think is a great white shark, but it ends up being the Megalodon pup. So Jonas wakes up, he tells Terry he loves him, or she, that he loves her, and then he sees the megalodon pup and he's like, well, that's like we come full circle now, like now we've captured this little one. But then the last thing that really happens is that Jonas passes out again, and so we really don't know if he is gonna like survive, or if he, you know, if there was so much damage that he actually dies, because it ends on that cliffhanger and you have to read the next book. So that's a really fast summary of the Meg. Hopefully it helps you with your slides, and we're done. Like, get it done. Awesome.